Video 2 of the Constitution. As last we left, we had the State of Nature Island, where we had Mr. Hobbes and Mr. Rousseau and Mr. Montesquieu and Mr. Locke and Mr. Mill, and they're all running around on the island, and they all have, individually, they have more power than the national government, which they haven't really established, and it's all going to be chaotic, and nothing's going to work. See, that was a metaphor from the last video with the Articles of Confederation. Okay, good. I'm glad you got that. So, we have the Articles not working, and we're going to get together here in together in Philadelphia, and we're going to meet to fix the Articles. And that was the game plan, to fix the Articles. It wasn't to totally trash the Articles and get a brand new Constitution. That's what we're going to do anyway. So, they're going to meet in Philadelphia. We're going to have 12 of the 13 colonies are going to show up at the beginning, Rhode Island, whatever. We have 55 guys. Yep. Now, these 55 guys are not... They are not representative of the average American. The vast majority of these guys are fairly rich. In today's standards, they'd probably mostly be millionaires. They're from elite families, etc., etc., etc. They're all going to sit down in this room. And the great thing about this, the most important thing about what they did on that very first day, it's easily argued. Not even an argument. This is it. The most important thing they did on that first day, they elected George Washington as the president of the convention. Oh, so they get to call him President Washington. The president of the convention. So the president of the convention is the guy who stands up there with the gavel and says, all right, I now recognize Mr. Franklin from Pennsylvania. I now recognize Mr. Hamilton from New York. That's the guy who does that. He's the one who sets the agenda. He's the one who keeps the control. And one of the things that George Washington did was as soon as he got the gavel, he said, all right, rule number 1. Nobody talks about what goes on inside this room. At 5 o'clock, when we go across the street to the local bar and everybody gets drunk, nobody talks about what we're talking about in here. Nobody. In fact, nobody's going to write down anything. Nobody's taking notes. Nobody. It's all going to be a secret. If you don't like it, there's the door. And of course, he's George Washington, so everybody's like, okay, you're the boss. And sure enough, nobody took notes in the room. Another one of the colorful characters is James Madison. And James Madison, he chooses not to go across the street to the local bar every evening at 5 o'clock with the rest of them. He chooses to go back to his hotel room down the street, and he immediately gets out his notebook and he writes down everything that happened. So, in a sense, it was the letter of the law, the spirit of the law. He definitely broke the spirit of the law, but he didn't break the letter of the law because he didn't take notes during the session. He did it afterwards and used his phenomenal memory. And the crazy thing about that is, here we are in the year 2020, and the Supreme Court is still looking at Madison's original journal saying, well, this is what it says in the Constitution, but this is what the framers meant. It's pretty cool. Interesting note here, George Washington, sometimes you'll see a capital G and a little O. It looks like a degree sign. And so that's the shorthand way of saying George. Thomas, sometimes you'll see it with a TH and a degree sign for the O, and that represents Thomas. It doesn't work for my name, although what I do is I put a B and then a sharp sign. You guys would call it a hashtag. So B sharp, because I've got that little music behind, background. And so all of you musicians in here are like, what, B sharp? Don't you just call that a C? I know, but I'm calling it B sharp. Plus, sharp, like, clever. There you go. Also, it's an homage to The Simpsons. Okay, moving on. Hey, I don't even think I have my clicker. I'll be right back. Where is my clicker? I don't have my clicker. I found it. Oh, it was hiding in the dark. I knew you guys were worried about it. All right. Turn on the clicker. The agenda, how to fix the articles. Well, the first thing that they did was they looked at the articles, like on day 2, and they said, you know what, we can't fix this. We literally cannot fix this, because what we're going to have to do to fix it is we're going to have to basically take every sentence in there, and we're going to have to argue about it, and we're going to add some stuff and subtract some stuff, and everybody's going to have to agree, because the articles say you can only amend the articles if it's a unanimous agreement, and so nobody's going to do that. And so the very first vote that these guys took was, we're getting rid of the articles. We're going to start from ground zero. So, we the people. Various equality issues. This was a sticking point. So you have the little bitty states and the big states. And please note, when we say big states and little states, for the purpose of this conversation, it's population. So, I mean, we look at Virginia, big state, big population. New York, big state, big population. Massachusetts, small state, but because of Boston, big population. Well, back then, big population. So therefore, Massachusetts goes into the big state category. So we're talking about not the size of the states, we're talking about the population when we say big state versus little state. The big states say, okay, let's talk about how we're going to actually vote and how the votes count. So if we have a Congress, and then from the big states' point of view, they say, well, we should have it proportional to the amount of people we have in our state. So Virginia should get more votes than, say, Maryland, or Rhode Island, which has not very many people in it. So Virginia should get more votes because there's more people. Well, that makes total sense to Virginia. And New York, big fan of that. And Massachusetts, they're a fan of that because they're looking at their populations and they say, look, we get more votes for that because we have a bigger population, so therefore that just makes sense. Now the small states, for example, New Jersey, they come up with a plan, with the Virginia plan, the New Jersey plan. The New Jersey plan says, no. We are all individual states. We are all equal, so therefore we should all have the same amount of vote. So each state gets one vote. It doesn't matter how big you are. It doesn't matter how much population you have. Every state gets one vote. This almost tore these guys apart because the big states were not going to back down and the small states were not going to back down until we come up with a compromise. And if you know anything about the Constitution and how they formed it, it was all about compromises. We call this the Connecticut Compromise, but most people, they're going to learn it as the Great Compromise. So if you see the word Great Compromise anywhere on any quiz or essay or whatever, it's talking about this right here. The small states want equal representation. The big states want population representation. How do they fix it? They compromise. And how do you compromise? You give them both what they want and both what they don't want. You make Congress two different houses. You have a House of Representatives and you have a Senate. In the House of Representatives, it is based on the population of your state. So right now in 2020, California, which is our most populous state, they have more votes than other states that have much less population. But then in the Senate has an equal vote. Every state's going to get 2 votes. Every state. Doesn't matter how big you are, how small you are. So little bitty population-wise, Montana gets the same amount of votes as California, which is several hundred times bigger, maybe 1,000 times bigger in population. Yeah, probably 1,000. I don't know. And so that's compromise. And the big states didn't like it, and the small states didn't like it, but they compromised because they both got what they want, kind of. One of the arguments was that what about money? What about if we pass bills that involve money in the big states? Because obviously the big states, they have the more population, they have the bigger economies. And so they said, we want all the money bills to start in the House where we have the population votes. And so that was part of the compromise. All right. Next compromise came over slavery, because in the House of Representatives, in the Senate you get 2 votes. It doesn't matter. 2 votes total, every state. In the House, you get it based on your population. And so in the House, how do you count slaves? You count slaves as population. Well, the northern states said, no, you don't count slaves because they can't vote, and they're not people because they're slaves, and so you can't count them. And of course, the southern states are like, yes, you absolutely count the slaves because they are people, and yes, they can't vote, but they are people, and therefore, South Carolina, which at this point is what, close to 2/3 slaves, that they should get to be counted. Okay, I get that. I get that that's an argument. Here's a really weird flip side thing. What about taxes? You tax the slaves? Well, the southern state said, no, we're not taxing slaves because, no, that's not fair. We're not taxing slaves because the North doesn't have slaves. And the northern state says, yeah, absolutely we should tax the slaves because we don't have any. So the southerners should have to be taxed on their slaves. So it's the flip side argument from both sides. The North wants to count slaves for tax purposes, but doesn't want to count slaves as population purposes. And the South wants to count them for population, but does not want to count them for taxes. Well, here we go. There's a big problem again. And this isn't big state, small state. This is North state versus South state. So what's the compromise? In one of the craziest compromises of all time, and you guys know this from 5th grade, the Continental Congress, led by George Washington, came up with a brilliant plan of saying that every individual slave is worth 3/5 of a person. So 5 slaves count for 3 people. That counts for population and tax purposes. So 1 slave is worth 60% of a real person, a real countable person, right? And so there's the compromise. And of course the South was not happy about that because they're going to have to pay taxes on 60% of their people, of their slaves. And the North isn't happy about that because the South gets to count 60% of their slaves as people. And then in another compromise, who actually gets to vote within the states? Do women get to vote? Well, not yet. Wyoming's going to get there. Do women? Oh, Wyoming doesn't exist yet. But do women get to vote? No. Do slaves get to vote? No. Do poor people get to vote? No, not necessarily. Do et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the states are going to be given that choice to make those decisions of who gets to vote. In the economic realm, obviously in the articles, which we covered in the last video, the articles don't have, the economics is very, very, very weak. They can't coin money, they can't have taxes, they can't. All right, and so the Constitution is going to try to fix all that. And the Constitution is going to set the game plan, set the rules, not the individual laws, but set up the rules for the economics. And so here's a quick list of them. I'll blow down through them. Levy taxes, paid. So Congress has the ability to levy a tax, which means make a tax. Pay debts, borrow money, coin money, and regulate its value. Regulate interstate commerce. Well, I hope you heard that one. Regulate interstate commerce. We're going to come back to that. Establish uniform laws of bankruptcy. Punish piracy. Because, those crazy pirates in the year 1787, which I guess they had pirates in 1787. Today, we have different types of pirates. And by the way, that is, well, I guess we still have, like, regular pirates out there in Mogadishu and Somalia. But we have, piracy of electronic blah, blah, blah. Well, that counts under the Constitution. Punishing counterfeiters, creating standard weights and measures, establishing post offices, and protecting copyrights and patents. And all that falls under economics. So, yay! We finally have some ground rules which we can set. Prohibitions on the states. Again, the articles said basically the states had total power over everything individually, and the national government was... So, this Constitution is going to say, no, we're going to put some limits on the states. Here we go. States cannot pass laws impairing the obligations of contract. Oh, we're going to have a Supreme Court justice that's going to smack some people around because of that. States cannot coin money or issue paper money. Virginia cannot come up with the Virginia dollar. Massachusetts can't come up with the Massachusetts dollar. They've got to come up with, the federal government's going to come up with the dollar. States cannot require payment of debts with paper money. So that forces Virginia to take gold and not just Virginia credit. They can take gold, and you can spend gold anywhere in the United States, or silver anywhere in the United States, or whatever. I guess we can still do that today. Can you imagine walking into McDonald's and being like, I'll take 2 cheeseburgers and a fries and a Coke, and here's a nugget of gold. I wonder what they would do. Huh. Well, if I had a negative gold, I'd tell you, but I don't have one. States cannot tax imports or exports from abroad from other states. You know, under the article, states were taxing each other. States cannot free runaway slaves from other states. So the idea that a slave from the south runs across the Ohio River, and it's, you know, the Northwest Ordinance that says there's no slaves above the Ohio River, and therefore, hey, that slave is free. No, the Constitution says, well, it did say, no, you got to return that slave. You got to return him. Other key provisions. We're going to talk about this more next video. The national government is going to assume a whole bunch of debt that all the states have. Alexander Hamilton is going to have this brilliant plan. The Constitution guarantees a Republican form of government. Republican, we're not saying Republican like Republican versus Democrat. We're saying Republican as in it's a republic, that I vote for somebody who then votes. That's a republic. And then states must respect civil court judgments and contracts made in other states. So this is the idea that if I get married in Las Vegas and I come back here to Oklahoma, then Oklahoma has to honor my marriage in Las Vegas. Whether I was drunk or not, I'm married. And you think, okay, no big deal. Well, this is a big deal because, say, for example, in the year 2000, if two people who were gay who wanted to get married and they moved up to Vermont, or they went up to Vermont and they got married in Vermont in a gay wedding, and then they come back and they want to live in, say, Texas. Well, in the year 2000, if you could not be married as a gay person in Texas or Oklahoma, for that matter. So that's going to cause an issue, and that there's going to be a court case, and they're going to go all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's going to say, well, that's what it says, so people are married. Okay, so the Constitution, again, doesn't have specific laws necessarily. They've got a couple. But they have big generalizations. Now, saying that, the Constitution does have some really important laws or ideas in there, very specifically against the states and things like that. So, for example, here, prohibit suspension of writ of habeas corpus. Writ of habeas corpus. Habeas corpus. Corpus is the body, like a corpse. Habeas, to have. So to have the corpse. And so if you were pulled over and the police officer grabs you and puts you in the car and throws you in jail, your right to habeas corpus is that you have the right to be told what you did or what you're being accused of. That's the right of habeas corpus. And, you know, the various TV shows and movies tell us that if you're not told within 24 hours or 48 hours, then you get to be released for free. And so, well, that's what the lawyers are going to argue for you. No bills of attainder. A bill of attainder is a law that says only this type of person has to follow this law. You can't make a law that says that. You can't just single out 12-year-old Jewish girls. You can't do that. That's against the law in the Constitution. No ex post facto laws. An ex post facto is where you commit a crime, then you do something, then Congress makes that a crime, or the government makes that a crime, and then they prosecute you for doing it after they made that a crime. For example, if I'm speeding down the road and I get pulled over for doing 70 in the neighborhood, and then the next day they decide to make that a school zone, and they put up the school zone sign, and then they charge me not only for doing 70 in the neighborhood, 70 miles per hour in the neighborhood, but now I'm being accused of doing 70 in the school zone. Well, they can't do that. It's called ex post facto. That school zone sign should have been there before I was incredibly reckless. So that's called ex post facto. Religious qualifications for holding office are prohibited. Strict rules of evidence for conviction of treason. Right to trial by jury. And then there were some things that, you know, we think about as, well, that's just obvious. We have the right to speech and the right to press and the right to religion. But, you know, that wasn't written down yet. And so those were omitted. And some of them were intentionally omitted. And we'll see that in a little bit. So James Madison, James Madison, the one who's cheating, and he's writing down everything in his notebook after the fact. He comes in with a game plan. I mean, the rest of the guys, they were coming in to fix the articles. Madison came in knowing that the articles were awful and that he was going to say, hey, President Washington, that's Constitutional Convention President Washington, because he's not president, like president with a capital P, President Washington yet. But, hey, President Washington, I've got an idea. And so he's going to do this. Limiting majority control. Oh, look, that's a limited majority control. That would be, let's see, Hobbes, Rousseau, Locke, Montesquieu, Mills. Oh, look how that all works. Separating powers. Well, that seems like that's, let's see, Locke. You got to take some of the power from the king so they don't take away your property. Creating checks and balances. Well, there's some Montesquieu in there. Establishing a federal system. And so this is an interesting idea, a federal system. There's the federal government and the state government, just like we had under the Articles of Confederation, but this one is actually spelled out. And it says very simply, if the federal government says X and the state government says Y, guess which one we're going to go with? We're going to go with the federal government X, which is a radical change from the Articles of Confederation, which had the reverse. Madison's proposals went a lot of different directions. One of these was the amount of time that you were in office. So you think about the House of Representatives. The entire House, all 435 of those guys and gals, they are re-elected every 2 years. The entire House of Representatives, we're talking about the federal House, all 435 of them, every 2 years. So in the year 2020, this is the Speaker of the House is Nancy Pelosi. She's been Speaker of the House for a while. She's been in Congress for a long time. But every 2 years, she has to be re-elected. Every 2 years. And they all do. The reason Madison gives, the reason that we do this, is because the House is responsive, is very, very responsive to the climate of the people. So if something goes cattywampus, and the Congress doesn't deal with it, and the American people are upset about this, they could literally, within just a span of 2 years, just totally change up everybody in Congress, in the House. So Madison says, so that is very, very reflective, very responsive to the people. On the flip side, you have the Senate. If you're a senator for 6 years. And the reason Madison says we want them to be there for 6 years is because we don't want them as influenced by the people. Because, the crowd, we don't, the unruly mob, right? And if we're thinking we want to do X, Y, Z, the Senate, a senator can say, you know what, I'm going to vote against that. And in 4 or 5 years, when you guys re-elect me, you're not going to remember that I voted against you. And so Madison says the Senate brings stability. It brings stability to the Congress. If you look at the President of the United States, the President's position is that he or she, but at this point it's only up to he, he's only in there for 4 years. So that's a halfway between the very, very responsive House of Representatives and the very not necessarily responsive Senate. So 2, 4, and 6. So he's halfway between, the president is. And then you get the judges. Federal judges, once they are put into their judgeship, they are there, and it says, probably says up there, it says lifetime terms. Well, that's not what the Constitution actually says. The Constitution says during times of good behavior, which at this point has basically been interpreted until they either decide to retire themselves or they die. And if you're talking about a Supreme Court justice, that's about half and half. A lot of them die in fact, we just had Justice Ginsburg pass away. But some of them will retire, but many of them will stay on there until, a lot of times they'll stay on there until they're very, 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 very ready to go, and then they're going to look and see which type of president it is. Because if they're a conservative judge, they want a Republican president to replace them. And if they're a liberal judge, then they want a Democrat to replace them. And so some of them will hang on an extra 4 years just to see if the next president is one of the good guys. We could talk about all the checks and balances, but this is not government class. I've already spent way too much time talking about government stuff. So checks and balances, the president can veto, the courts can overrule stuff, the Congress can impeach people. All right, so that's not, it is, it's American history, but that's American government. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that. All right, Benjamin Franklin, the Constitutional Republic, a republic. Again, republic is a type of government. We do not have a democracy here in the United States, and that's a big misnomer. Well, everybody can vote. Well, no, you guys can't. Well, some of you can, but most of you who are listening to this as my students, you can't vote yet. So is it a democracy? No, I'm the only one in the room who gets to vote. So much power. So it's not a democracy, it's a republic. Now, a republic is very simply, I vote for somebody who I believe will vote in the way I do, and or somebody who I trust will vote correctly when a novel situation comes up. So it's republic. I vote for somebody who then votes. Let's see. And a republic, which is good from Madison's point of view, is very slow to change. It's not a quickly changing thing. Again, we have the Senate that's there for 6 years. We have the president. The president is there for 4 years. So if they do something incredibly bad in their first year of tenure, nobody's going to remember that 3 years later or 5 years later. Nobody's going to remember. And so it's very slow to change. And sometimes that is a good thing, because if everybody was reelected every 2 years, like everybody was reelected, we could have some pretty crazy governments like they have over there in Europe. That's all government stuff. And hopefully next year, we'll get to talk government. Benjamin Franklin. Mrs. Powell of Philadelphia asked Benjamin Franklin, quote, "Well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" With no hesitation whatsoever, Franklin responded, "A republic, if you can keep it." Dun 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 dun. No, that's too many. Dun dun dun. What was the first one? Oh, the first one was Monday Night Football. Sorry. Dun dun dun. I'll do a republic, if you can keep it. Dun dun dun. That's better. To ratify the new Constitution, the rule was you had to get 9 states to ratify it, and so they sent it out to the conventions of the states. Not the state legislatures, but the conventions. Each state had to form a little convention specifically to ratify the Constitution. The very first state to ratify it was Delaware, and so on their coin, like their little quarter, they put the first state. Yes, technically Delaware was the first one to sign, so they technically get to say that they were the first state of the United States. But, Virginia had Jamestown, right? Massachusetts had the Massachusetts Bay Colony, but Delaware, they're the first state because they signed the Constitution first. We'll give it to them because Delaware. And then 9 states signed reasonably quick. New Hampshire was the 9th state, and as soon as New Hampshire signed, boom, there's 9 out of 13. Constitution goes into effect. Kind of. Well, no, it's like for real, it goes into effect. But the problem was that Virginia and New York had not signed yet. Virginia's going to come on board eventually, but then New York, if New York doesn't sign, if Virginia doesn't sign or New York doesn't sign, it's not going to, the whole thing's going to come apart because they've got the big populations. So how do you get these guys to sign on, especially when we have detractors? The Federalists, the people who are very pro-Constitution, the Federalists, large landowners, wealthy merchants, professionals, they prefer a strong government, strong national government, and weaker state governments. They tend to be, government by the elite and expected few violations of individual liberties. And so they're saying that we don't need to write down all the rules because people are generally, good people, and we're not going to violate each other's liberties. Well, I'm sure that'll work out. Then you have this other group, and they're going to be, what's great is if you get to name yourself first, like the Federalists, then when the opposing team shows up, then you can name them and say, they're the AntiFederalists. And so, anything that says the word anti, people are like, oh, the anti, that seems like, nobody wants to vote for them. The AntiFederalists, which we're going to call the Democratic Republicans, they are going to, they're not very happy about the Constitution because they want the states to have more power than the national government. So they're going to push against the Constitution. We've got some really big guys in Virginia who are Democratic Republicans, including a guy by the name of Thomas Jefferson, and some other guys. And so this is going to cause a problem. How do you get Virginia? How do you get New York on board? So three guys: Alexander Hamilton, John Madison, and John Jay. James Madison. Yes, it works out in my head. I'll say that again. Three guys: Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. Those three guys are going to they're going to write a series of articles. Am I right? They're going to write 85 articles, and they're going to publish it in the newspaper up in New York City. Each one of these articles basically takes a line or an idea from the newly written Constitution and explains it, hopefully in a way that people will read it and go, "Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I'm on board with that." So they're going to write 85 of these. James Madison is going to write the vast majority of them. Why am I struggling with these names? James Madison is going to write the vast majority of them. Alexander Hamilton is going to write the next, a very large group, and then John Jay is going to write a couple. But you write a couple, you get your name up there on the PowerPoint slide. And so they're not going to sign their own names. They're going to sign it Publius, the public. So it's a pseudonym. One of the things that the Anti-Federalists, the Democratic Republicans, are going to argue is they're going to say, yes, we get it, but how do we know that we have rights like the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the freedom of press? How do we know this? So the Federalists are eventually going to say, okay, look, Anti-Federalists, New York, Virginia, look, if you ratify the Constitution and everybody's on board, then we will immediately send some amendments out. We're going to call it the Bill of Rights. Send some amendments out, and so we will allay your fears, and we'll actually write the words freedom of speech. And after that, I mean, not everybody was happy, but they signed it. Here are the Bill of Rights, really quick. And again, it's not government class, but real short version here. First Amendment: the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press, the freedom of assembly, and the freedom to petition the government, redress of grievances. Oh man, if this was government class, we just spent days and days on that, but well, we'll get there later. Number two, the right to bear arms, depending on how you read it. Number three, the court, and again, no inside jokes. We're just moving on. Number three, the quartering of soldiers. Number four, search and seizure and search warrants. Number five, your ability to not incriminate yourself on the witness stand. I plead the fifth, and also not to have double jeopardy to be tried by the same crime twice, unless you commit it two times, I guess. Number six, rights of persons on trial for crimes. Number seven, the right to jury trials. Number eight, limitation on bail and punishments. For example, it says no cruel and unusual punishments. We could spend days. Number nine. Number nine's a big one, and it confuses people. It basically says, hey, we may have missed some. And just because we didn't list it doesn't mean that you don't have it. So, for example, when we get up to the 1960s and the 1970s, and we get to, say, for example, Roe versus Wade, which is the famous abortion case, and somebody says women have the right to privacy, then the argument is number 9, because the word privacy is not anywhere in the Constitution or in the Bill of Rights, but in the 9th Amendment it says just because we didn't write it down doesn't mean that you don't have it. So the argument is, well, you do have the right to privacy because it's something they didn't. Again, it's not government class. We're going to move on. And the 10th one is power. 10th one says if we didn't write it down in the Constitution, the states actually are in charge of it. So, for example, education, not anywhere in the Constitution. Therefore, states are in charge of school systems. And welfare. Well, actually, welfare is listed in the preamble, but like food stamps. Food stamps are not listed, so therefore, food stamps are controlled by the state. Confusing? The Bill of Rights, I just did those, and we're going to move on. You know how to make a change in the Constitution? Pretty easy. You got to get 2/3 of the Congress have to agree to it. So, for example, if President George W. Bush wants to pass or if he wants a new amendment to the Constitution that says no American flag shall be burned, he's got to get 67% of the Congress to agree to that, which he didn't get, so it's not going to move on. But if he were able to get that, then there's a couple different ways that they could do this. Then the Congress takes that text and they send it to the states. The state legislatures could vote on it. So again, I'm not voting on it. I'm not voting on the amendment, but I voted for somebody in my state legislature who then votes on the legislation. Or you could do a state convention, and so that'd be a lot of people elect a whole bunch of people to go down to the Capitol or our state convention would probably be in the Cox Center where the basketball games are, and then they would take a vote on it. So the vast majority of all of the amendments, all 27 of them, have gone to the state legislatures. The only one that's gone to a convention was the one that said, we're getting rid of prohibition. Prohibition was the one that said we can't drink alcohol anymore in the United States. Well, you can't sell it or own it or possess it or make it or send it anywhere. But then they, again, that's government. Don't worry about it. Hey, here's your last slide. Right? The Constitution. The line up here says it's pretty short. It's only 8,000 words. You know, the original Constitution was 4,500 and, oh man, I memorized this too, 4,573. Don't check me on that. Some of you are checking on it right now, aren't you? 4,500. I'm gonna be bold. 4,573. That seems right. Words in the original Constitution. Then, when they started adding amendments to it, it added another 2,000 in there. So it's now sitting at about 7,500 and something. So fewer than 8,000 words. It's not very long when you think about, 8,000 words. I know if I were to say, hey, I need you to write me an 8,000 word summary, you'd be like, what? You are an essay. What, are you kidding me? But no, it's not really that long. That's probably, what, 15 pages or whatever? And I know you're like, what? No, maybe more than 15 pages, maybe 25 pages. Yeah, probably about 25 pages. It does not prescribe every detail. So this is what's great about our Constitution here in the United States. Ours does not have a, if you do this, this is your punishment. If you do this, this is your punishment. If you do this, this is your reward. Ours doesn't say that. Ours sets out the boundaries of the rules. The president has the right to do this. The Congress has the right to do this. So if we're talking about who declares war, let's look at the list. Oh, Congress declares war. The president can do this with the troops, but Congress does this. But it doesn't say the Congress shall then choose to go after Iraq versus going after Iran versus, no, it doesn't list all that kind of stuff because it gives them the broad view. There's no mention of congressional committees. Let's see, and here's really arguably the most important point of this whole thing. Other than the Great Compromise, man, I hope you remember that. The Constitution is not static. It's not static. It's very flexible. So, for example, I mentioned the Roe versus Wade case that came out in '73. So we have in that case, and we'll talk all about that in government class. But in that case, they voted one direction, and because the majority of the Supreme Court justices thought that the right to privacy meant X, Y, Z, according to the Ninth Amendment, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, ninth, 14th Amendments, not the third, first, second, first. Oh, sorry, yeah, it is. First, third, fourth, fifth, ninth, 14th Amendments. Be sharp. But depending on how this newest Supreme Court judge in the year 2020 of September 30th, that's the date today, they're about to go through the hearing for Judge Comey. Judge Comey. Depending on when she gets on there, well, maybe there will be a switch of ideas about what privacy really means. That's what's great about our Constitution. And here in 50 years or 100 years, if the government or the people want to change it up, well, we can vote for other people, and then they can come in and they can change it all up again. So it's a living, breathing document. Pretty cool. Well, for some people, all right. I think I'm done. All right. Yeah, I'm done. See ya. Be good.